I want to thank our guest for being here. This is Celeste Nevarez. She is the Chief of Clinical Services with Emergence Health Network. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I don't want to take up too much of the time, but this is a leadership communication class, and one of the primary things we're talking about is communication. So, in your standpoint, as someone who is in a leadership position, but someone who is also a mental health expert, how critical is healthy communication in an organization?
These are really great questions, and I'm glad you're bringing them up because I think a lot of folks forget about mental health in general, but especially in leadership and even more so in communication. And I think that it's an uncomfortable topic for some people because I just got to crank out data. I need to move. I need to go. There's a situation. We need to move. It doesn't matter how I feel or it doesn't matter how you feel at this point. We just got to get it done. And that's absolutely not true. And I think even more so in a crisis situation like this or any kind of crisis, it's even more important to check in with your staff or your colleagues from a leadership perspective regarding their mental health. And it's going to throw some people off at first, like, why are you asking me about that? And people can sometimes get defensive, or do you think I can't handle this? Like, if I'm asking you that question, does
Mm,
that imply that you can't hang? And the answer to that is no. And so making that really normal in your everyday conversations, but that's a separate conversation for we'll get that lecture next time. But
yeah,
even more so in a crisis, because guess what? This crisis is not the only thing that people are focused on right now.
right.
In whatever job or capacity that they work or live in, they had issues prior to this. They were having marriage issues. They were having financial issues. They were having um, terminally ill parents, right? And then a crisis hits, whatever the crisis may be. In this case, it's a pandemic, but that crisis hits, and it's not like all of those things go away. If anything, they're magnified. And the
Right.
same goes with mental health, both on ourselves or our staff. And so, if you've got a staff who suffers from depression or anxiety, even mildly, or even something that they haven't shared with you as being diagnosed, this is going to be magnified during this time naturally. And so asking people how they're doing, first and foremost, is important. It's a humanistic approach to what we do. But people work harder, people work better when they feel valued and when they feel heard.
Right.
So if you are holding space for your team to be able to feel valued, be seen, be heard, they're going to perform better. And we can talk about, I mean, burnout, and talk about how folks just in the workforce in general can burn out. But then you've got a crisis. People are working longer hours, weird hours. There's shifts and changes every turn, right? Like, we figured something out for our documentation. I'll use me as an example. We figured this out. Turns out Systematic was kicking them all back. We have to revamp all of our documentation. And it's like, I mean, it's a requirement. We got to do what we got to do. But how you introduce that, how you communicate those changes is
Hmm.
going to separate you from being a good leader to a horrible boss,
Right.
right? Um, so recognizing that mental health is part of any crisis, whatever it may be. So checking in, asking those questions, and communicating that that's of value to you. And
Okay.
so it helps model some of that behavior. Like, I know an example I can give. So we were closed for Good Friday. Our agency was closed. So I sent an email out Thursday around 2 or 3 o'clock, and I said, everybody, and we're all salaried, so I mean, and they have their laptops at home. I know that they can physically work. I said
Right.
everybody needs to take Friday off, and I will be doing the same. And we all need a mental health day. And I got, it was weird, as my supervisors, I told them before, and I even threatened to block their Microsoft login ability, which didn't
Yeah.
go over well. But they were the ones that were freaking out. But what am I going to do? And I was like, it's a day. It's a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
And my staff were freaking. There were a couple that freaked out and emailed me, but for the most part, people emailed me back and said, you know what, I hadn't even realized how much I needed a day. So thank you for that. Because as leaders, right, we have the gift or the strength of foresight, and so it's our job and responsibility to be thinking ahead and not just thinking about, the next
Right.
10 minutes. We got to
Right.
think about, especially in a pandemic like this, where I think we originally were like, it'll be 2 weeks. We're we're going to be looking at 2 months
Right.
minimum.
Right.
So if you don't communicate about mental health or include that in your communications, you're going to burn out. You're going to burn out quick. And now you've got whatever crisis you're dealing with, and now a staffing crisis, which is not pleasant or fun
Right.
to deal with. So I jotted down a few notes that I want to make sure I include. So being creative is really important. So the way that you communicate information, if you're sending out 10 emails a day with the same repetitive emails, right? Like if it needs to be, there needs to be some fun to it. Don't be something you're somebody you're not. Like if you don't use fun fonts and exclamation marks, don't start. It's weird.
Yeah,
Don't do that.
you're good.
What I mean by creative is waiting and consolidating information or communicating in a new way. I've been trying to do like voice, audio, emails rather than just text. We're doing huddles and end of week meetings or mid-week meetings, depending on your team and mood. And we started doing some fun stuff like on Friday, everybody had to wear a hat during the like screen time meeting. And so got some really weird ones. They were fun.
Okay.
But just remembering that we are here to work, but we also have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
So being creative in your communication, I think, is really important. Be honest. Now, as leaders, it's our job to filter. You know, if my CEO tells me, which we haven't had this, but if she said we're shutting down tomorrow, I don't call everybody, we're shutting down tomorrow, you know, and stir up that panic.
Right.
I'm going to wait till I have the details, and then I can be honest and say, hey guys, there's a lot of things going on right now. I'm not sure what the future holds, but as soon as I get a definitive answer, I'll get back to you.
Right.
And I mean, think about yourself, right? Like the best bosses you've ever had were the ones that were trustworthy and transparent. And so doing that for your staff, and it can be filtered, right? It doesn't have to be brash or unedited or unfiltered. It can, you know, sift through that to make sure your communication is still creative and kind,
Right.
but being really honest, I think, is really important and will go such a long way. And to include your own mental health, I fully disclosed with my staff last week that I was not doing well. I inundated myself with meetings. I stacked them up, I think like every 30 minutes. And I thought I was going to knock everything out in a day, which was not a good idea.
Yeah.
And just said, you know what? Somebody asked me a question. Hey, can you look at this? And I said, you know what? And I sent an email to them. Hey guys, today's not a good day. I'm just trying to do the best I can. Send me your stuff. I'll get back to you tomorrow. But I'm just trying to keep my head above water right now.
Right.
And I'm sure there are some people that looked at that or would read that and be like, that's weak or that's bad leadership. But
Right.
being honest, by modeling that honesty, they will be more honest with you.
Right.
And they will tell you what they need. So instead of you guessing, which is terribly difficult,
Right.
they'll tell you and they'll come to you with that. And that leads me to my last point, and that is to be vulnerable to the capacity that you can be within your workplace, and sharing that, like, I'm freaking out too, or I'm really struggling, or I'm really worried about this, in this case, the pandemic. Um, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Or you know, just saying like, I'm not sleeping really well. I've been having, this is me being vulnerable with you now, I've been having these really, really very strange vivid dreams, and I finally did some research on it. Turns out a lot of people are, and
Right.
it's from the lack of like normalcy and interacting with people in our usual workplace and settings and all of that. Our mind is starting to wander. Now I didn't get into my dreams with my staff, but I just said, is anybody else having like these weird
Yeah.
dreams? And they're like, oh my God, me too. And so it just held some space for us to have a quick conversation about how we're all feeling a little strange. And then we got started with our meeting. We were productive because if we are healthy, happy, and mentally well, we're more productive.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to do and trying to lead, right? Is
Yeah.
trying to produce as much of a quality product as we can, whatever that product may be. So it's important. It's really, really important. I think a lot about, obviously Brene Brown, who is like my God, um, and her mission to dare greatly and to get into the arena and to
Yeah.
be vulnerable and all of those things. And I think even more so during a crisis, all of those things, all of those elements are magnified,
Yeah.
because in true crisis is where you see people shine or crumble.
Right.
And so really doing the foundation work in your leadership class now will set you up for when stuff like this happens, because nobody planned for this,
Right.
but it's happening. We still have to adapt.
Right. And I think the important thing to remember, because you know we're recording this on April of 2020, but I'm recording these lectures for future classes as well. This isn't advice just for this one
No,
individualistic crisis. Like this is for any type of crisis your organization might be going through.
absolutely. I think this advice is what I would have given. We went after the August 3rd shooting. My group of therapists were the first to arrive on scene at that family reunification center at the school. I would have given you the same advice in August that I'm giving you now.
Right.
Obviously, lessons learned along the way, and with
Of
each
course.
crisis, things shift and recalibrate. But no, in any kind of crisis, all of these things are just as important. So I'm glad you brought that up. Right. This is April 2020, but this will hold true of April 2021 and forward.
Okay. And what what advice would you have for eventually when this thing gets lifted and people are now having to kind of transition back into somewhat of normalcy? What are some things that people in a leadership position should be aware of?
That it's not going to be overnight.
Right.
I think what I'm worried about is that folks are, let's say we go back to the office, I don't know, May 26th, and that we're going to get to the office. Our offices are going to look the exact same way, feel the exact same way. You know, everything's going to be left right in its place, and we're going to start our workday, and it's going to look and feel the exact same. And the truth of the matter is, it's not. There was a transition period coming into this crisis. There's going to be a transition period coming out of it as
Right.
well. And so, just being really honest with yourself that things might not um, pick up right where you left them, and
Right.
that's really okay.
Yeah.
But to be patient and gentle with that transition back into it.
And lastly, what I know the majority of the conversation has been about communication surrounding this crisis, but just in general, as a mental health expert, what are some things you would want to advocate for to other leaders in terms of the importance of communication and healthy communication?
Hmm. I think what's important is that you continue to speak to people in the way that you would like to be spoken to. And I know that's so cliche, which is why I paused for so long. Um, but it's the truth. It
Yeah.
really is. It's the truth. And so just showing that kindness that people are deserve or don't deserve, and teaching other people. That's what being a leader is, right? Teaching other people how to communicate that, because some of our staff, this might be their first job, or this might be the first time reporting to you, and you might be totally radical compared to their last boss or
Mm.
bosses. um, but you can shape that. You can shape the culture within your department, your group, within your huddle, whatever that may be. And so creating a culture of mental health being a priority is up to you. And
Right.
so the more that you integrate that into conversations and the way that you talk about those things, right? We don't talk about mental health with shame or to induce guilt or um, in a negative light. The more normal it becomes for folks to be able to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations.
That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I will
Um,
say that most of my students are in the military, but all of my students are in this program because they're getting their master's in leadership and they're trying to get more prepared entering the workforce.
I'm just so excited for all of your students. I think part of the reason why I became a leader um, is because I had such bad leaders before me. So
Right.
I'm an example of learning through what not to do.
Hmm.
So I love that all of you are doing the work to get ahead of that and will come out that much stronger. I guess my final piece of advice or suggestion is to never become complacent. You will come out of this each crisis that you survive as a leader a little bit smarter, wiser, older. Um, but don't stop learning. You know, it doesn't matter what your title is or what your rank is or how many times you've seen a crisis. Just never get complacent. Don't stop learning. Don't stop growing, and we'll keep moving the needle forward.
Perfect. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You guys stay safe. Be well.